This one is the story of my workbench. The story really starts somewhere else. I don't even know where. Some basketball floor that was at the end of its life had been cut up into large slabs and being sold, and I bought one of those slabs, brought it home, and repurposed it as the new top for my workbench. Of course, this is problematic. Gym flooring is made from hard maple, so I knew it would potentially make a great workbench top. But you know, it's filled with nails, and the subflooring is just plywood. But I figured I could work around that and still make it work out okay. You know, it was plenty heavy, so I simply needed to cut it in half and double it up to get a nice, really thick bench top to work with. Now, of course, I had to make sure that the plywood had a smooth surface. There's nails, there's things sticking out. But once I had that ready, I could glue the two halves together, and it was really heavy, but I just used screws to clamp it. At this point, it's obviously getting pretty late in the day. I was running out of light, but it was a beautiful sunset that night. This process overall took several days. I was off on a holiday break, so thankfully I had roughly a week to work on this. So the next day I could fire up again, and with the two halves glued together, I just had to figure out, you know, what the final size would be and start ripping it down. Of course, this was far too heavy for me to use on my table saw, so just using a simple crosscut or circular saw worked well. I was cutting through nails and other, all this stuff, so that really was best. Now this is the base. The base I had already built, and it's simply, it's plywood, and the idea came from an article in Fine Woodworking magazine. And you just have strips of plywood that you've put together to create the base. It's actually really simple, but it makes for a rock solid base. I really like it, but in the past I had a torsion box top on there, and it really was just an assembly table. Didn't have any clamping, so this was going to be a much better option. For all the edges of this top, I decided to glue up a bunch of, it was also flooring, but I had to mill it down and cut it down into pieces. And you know, this worked. I'm really happy with the results, but milling down this much flooring into something usable is not something that I could necessarily recommend. It's just such a hassle. But with all the flooring rough, milled down and cut into rough sizes, you start putting them together, and you see I'm basically going to take and glue up just big slabs of these to use as the sides of the workbench. In this case, I'm using some biscuits to help line things up. They don't add any strength particularly, but then at some point I decided to go without that and just start gluing stuff up. At this point, the basketball, I took the top. It's not attached, but it still had the gym flooring surface applied to it. So it worked actually really well for, it didn't take to any glue or anything. So it was nice to be able to use that at this point. So I glued up shorter sections, a little bit thicker for the ends, and two really long sections for the front and back. and then milled those down so that they were nice and surfaced. Once I was ready to attach the sides, I was going to do that in two ways. I have a domino joiner, so I was going to throw dominoes in there as a good way to attach it. I certainly couldn't just glue it, because again, I'm gluing partially to just potentially end grain and plywood. That wouldn't work. So I'm going to use dominoes. I'm also going to use long lag bolts. I'm just prepping everything, and originally I thought I'd do a double row of dominoes. I did try that, but I found that I just couldn't get it to work, so a single row was fine, and I couldn't get a double row actually to fit. It was just too tight, but a single row I was able to get in. So getting everything tapped in, and I ended up using, I believe they're called Spax screws. And they worked really well. This time, took a little more persuasion. It did not want to fit in there, and I had to hammer on it a bit more, and that broke one of the glue laminations loose. So that was frustrating. Had to come back and chisel off as much glue as I could and figure out a way to fix that. Which just ended up being, stuff as much glue in there as I could, and then screw it into place. And this ended up being the back side, so it's never seen. There's so many mistakes on this build, some that are still visible, some that are somewhat hidden. So you see, I'm not joining the sides and the ends in any way. It's just trying to meet it all up flush. You can get an idea that, definitely have to do a lot of leveling on the top. It is not flat at all. It's going to take some work to get it all surfaced down. So to start out with, I took a really aggressive, electric planer to take that top off and to start taking down the sides. You can see from the shadow that there's just plenty to do. But once I had it down pretty close and mostly flat, then I went back to hand planes. I've never flattened a bench top before. I've not used hand planes really much before. So this was a great both learning experience, and it did work out. It was fun. It was tiring, but it was fun. The basic methodology is that you're using going crossways with the larger plane to flatten everything, and then you're going to smooth everything out with your smaller planes. Using a gym floor in this way, I did ruin, I think, one of my domino bits. I hit a nasty patch of nails, and I think I ruined one of my router bits too. But in the end, I was really happy with this. It smoothed out really beautifully. It was nice, heavy workbench top. So next, we need some clamping options.